everybody. Welcome to the Saving with Steve show, where we talk about the ins and outs of money, pretty much everything under the sun that relates to you having a happier, healthier relationship with money. I want to thank you for joining us today. I want to thank you for sharing with your friends and families. We've got one heck of a show today. Today, it's all about the legal system. According to the Pacific Research Institute, Americans pay a tort tax of about $1,300 per person, thanks to lawsuit abuse. And reforming the legal system could boost the U.S. economy by 2% over time, finds a new study released by the California-based nonpartisan free market think tank, the Pacific Research Institute. We have fellow Dr. Winegarden. He's here with us today. I mean, he's got a tremendous amount of experience with Fortune 500 companies, medium-sized small businesses, trade associations. We're lucky to have him. He's going to go through all the ins and outs with that. But first, we're going to be talking about the signs of a recession. It's important to understand, like you and I understand, what's really going on with inflation. Last month, the inflation report, and you heard this in the headlines, okay? And the headline says inflation's going down and it's down to 3.3%. And you just saw the top line numbers. The big thing here is this: when you take a look at inflation, you realize, if you take a look at the report and you just go to the last inflation report, you'll see that energy, oil, gas, natural gas, are all down between 16 and 36%. Now, that is the reason why inflation is down in the last month. What you don't know, or maybe didn't see in the top line numbers, is the fact that Mr. Biden, our president, released 250 million barrels of oil months back to reduce that portion of inflation, okay? Problem is, that's kind of run out. And on top of that, we have OPEC and Russia reducing oil production by 2.5 million barrels a day. And just last week, another million barrels a day. So we've got oil production reduced by 3.5 million barrels a day. And now that you know that, you're realizing, hey, that's the reason why gas is up 60, 80, $1.20, or even more than that, depending on where you live, per gallon. Question I want to ask you, now that you understand what's going on, is where do you think inflation is going to go? Many economists expect it to go up, and they expect the Fed to actually raise interest rates. Problem is, how far can they raise it before we have problems? Because you got to remember, 60% of our economy is based off small businesses. Bankruptcies with small businesses have doubled from last year, and we're only halfway through the year. Secondly, these small businesses, they go from being charged 4, maybe 5% in taxation, 4 or 5% in interest, but now they're paying 12 and 13. It makes it much harder to do business. And if they're on adjustable rate interest rates, it's squeezing them. What do you think is going to happen with small businesses? Now, let's also turn ourselves over to what's really going on with the loan programs, where you see these office buildings, they're coming into play, and their mortgages are coming up, and you know what, they don't have enough people in there. And you've seen big buildings already being returned back to the banks. Many of our regional banks are there. Many of those regional banks have those loans. And if you saw Kevin O'Leary from the Shark Tank, he's saying, hey, there's $100 billion been removed from banks over the last 6 months. So you're starting to see all these little economic bubbles line up. And they're getting bigger and bigger. And what happens with bubbles? They burst, don't they? So it's really important that we understand what's going on economically, not on the top line, what you see in the news, but what's really going on under the surface. Because this is the time where you start saying, hey, you know what? I might want to make sure my debts are paid off or paid down so I have less credit card debt, because that's going up too. And it might be a good idea to stock money, make sure I have at least 6 months of expense money setting aside in case I lose my job. Because you know what? If interest rates keep going up, which they probably will, it's likely you're going to be in a position where there's going to be job losses, because that's one of the things the Fed wants to see in order to get the inflation under control. So folks, there's a lot going on, and you want to really take a look at it. Now, I want to thank you for joining us. like I said, I'm going to bring Wayne Winegarden in, and we're looking forward to chatting with him about tort reform. So with that, stick with us. We'll be right back. Hello, welcome back to the Saving with Steve show, where we talk about the ins and outs of money. Today, again, we have Dr. Wayne Winegarden. He's going to be talking about reforming the legal system, the tort system. And there's an interesting piece on your website, Wayne. And first of all, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Now, there's an interesting statement on the website. It says Americans pay a tort tax of $1,300 per person thanks to lawsuit abuse, and reforming the legal system could boost the U.S. economy by 2% over time. Now, and this is based off the study. One of the things that I saw that was interesting is it's a boom for lawyers, but not so much their clients. And that's kind of the message that I saw. So help people understand what's going on with the legal tort system, how it really benefits the attorneys. So let's just start right there, because people want to understand what's going on with this. And my understanding is there's, policymakers are involved with this, where they're contracting out to lawyers to do certain things, and the lawyers are doing very, very well from it, and so on and so forth.
This is a long-standing problem. I mean, when you talk about tort reform, you can go back 30 years when I, first got my Ph.D. and we were talking about tort reform then, and it's only gotten progressively worse. And part of the reason we picked up on this at this time was because as this problem has grown, it becomes a bigger and bigger pull on the economy, taking away opportunities, and in particular, taking away opportunities from small businesses. And so from a kind of saving, building up your nest egg, these small businesses are supposed to be a way that families can do that. And so we really wanted to highlight this idea that unless we bring this tort system under control, that pathway to the middle class is being shut down. And what's, to me, even worse is it's being shut down under the kind of the concept that we're helping the consumer. So you're really ending up with kind of a very anti kind of family policy, which is being justified by that we're helping the little guy. So that was part of our impetus for trying to look into this. And the other impetus is that you've now seen the ambulance chasers, can I use that word? Take over the AG's offices. And you're seeing that and sometimes the cases could be well-founded, but look at the opioid abuse cases, right? And there could be a real issue there. I'm not a lawyer. I don't pretend to talk about the merits of that case. But when you have private lawyers being hired by state AGs and getting paid, on basically how well they do, right? So they're going to get a piece of the action, as it were, all right? So they're based on a contingency fee. Well, that is a very distortive process, because now you're outsourcing the public defender kind of position to private attorneys, and those private attorneys don't have the same incentives that the public AG has, right? The public AG, the top law enforcement of each state, their job is to protect the public interest, which includes businesses, right? The private attorneys, their only incentive is to get as much money as possible. And you've seen several cases, Oklahoma, other areas, where the actually state AG has been dissatisfied for the exact reason that the private attorneys are using this as a way. It's investment banking, right? They're scouring the landscape and looking for their best financial return. So those were all the reasons we wanted to look at this. And even though it's an old issue, it's really ramping up and is really becoming a problem for individuals, for big businesses across the board. And we wanted to highlight some of the cases where you're seeing some of these issues and the damage that's being done.
So let me ask you this. Was it? And I just brought this when you said small businesses. One of my clients, they lived at the Arizona border, and basically an attorney came by and said that they didn't have the right disability door or something like that, even though they had a ramp out front, and basically ended up suing them. And basically they settled for $10,000 and moved on. Now, the reality is how does that actually help the disabled person? Because the disabled person is able to get in there, and I guess they didn't have one brace that was supposed to be in the bathroom, and something wasn't 3 inches longer, that type of thing. And it was one of those things where they said, the attorney told him, look, you're better off settling, because it's going to cost you 3 times that much if you go to court.
Yeah, and we document several of those cases in the study. And that's, to me, when you talk about small businesses, one of the most troubling aspect. They're called, drive-by kind of cases, where sometimes you'll just have the lawyer from a different state. So we document in Texas, where lawyers from Florida essentially just drove by looking at the parking lots. Do the spaces look too small? Is the signage correct? And obviously the Americans with Disability Act is incredibly important. And when there's real violations, that's an issue. But when you have a drive-by where no one's actually trying to access the business, or no one's not gaining access to it, but it's a technical violation, the business isn't even given the chance to correct the technical violation. That was one of the things we found that I thought is particularly disturbing. Often people aren't even sure. I mean, these are very detailed laws that if you're a small business, you don't know all of the details of the Americans with Disabilities Act. I mean, there's so many things as a small business owner you need to worry about. So the details of how big the parking space is supposed to be for a handicap is just, it's just too much to know. So you're in technical violation. You're not given the opportunity to fix it, which could be a couple $100 just to, change the, the signage or whatever case may be. You're not given that opportunity. You're being sued by someone who's not actually trying to access the business. And that $10,000 is right around what we found. That's kind of like the standard a toll that you have to pay, the shakedown that you pay to the lawyer for them to go away. And you pay it because you can spend $10,000 and make them go away, or you can fight it and spend $50,000. And even if you win, you're still at $50,000. It's a no-win situation. And it's a situation where, again, it is a technical violation, so you may actually lose, but there was no malice. It was something you weren't aware of, and you were never given a chance to rectify it. So it's completely unfair. And when we document this in the study as well, where you see these businesses, I mean, if you're a small business and you have to hand over $10,000, the one we documented, they were lucky enough to get through it, but that could be ruinous. I mean, $10,000 paid up front, you may not be able to get the liquidity back to keep on as an ongoing concern.
Mm-hmm. I could see that, because if most small businesses, especially in more rural areas, might be making $30,000 or $40,000 a year, and that could be 25% or more of the annual revenue that they have. So it could be completely devastating. Now, a lot of people want to understand, when you get a bigger business, obviously they're a bigger target because they have more money. So what type of legal suits are being, perpetrated there?
Well, for the larger businesses, a lot of it has to deal with the shareholders and talking about investment. And so, well, are there violations on mergers and acquisitions, things of that nature? And one of the things that we found was surprising is that you're talking about a vast majority of these mergers and acquisitions and these other deals are being raised. So, they're talking about tort abuse or some sort of, I'm not sorry, not tort abuse, but you're talking about some sort of violation of securities law and that is raised. And that just increases the costs of kind of these deals. And one of the strengths of the US economy is our deep financial markets. And obviously it helps the large businesses because they can capitalize, but it also helps small businesses because when you have a more vibrant corporate sector, often those are going to be sourcing things to small businesses, sourcing things to other businesses. So that helps create kind of a vibrant, broader economy, and that depends on kind of that vibrant financial market. Now, when you're adding these legal costs, when you're dealing with these very kind of complex mergers, acquisitions, things of that nature, when you now have, okay, we have to deal with the litigation through it. So now we have to evaluate not only kind of the deal, And does that make sense? Now we have to pay for that, but now we have to set aside additional money to deal with both the time that the litigation is going to impose, as well as the cost of that litigation, and of course the risk. What if we're unsuccessful? Those added costs are going to change your behaviors, right? When you increase the cost of doing a deal, you're going to get fewer deals, right? Just like if you increase the cost of apples, people will buy fewer apples. Same basic logic. So in these large kind of businesses, they're being impacted because they have to deal with those costs as well. Now, they're usually better able to manage it than a small business, right? Very large corporations, they have legal departments, they have chief counsel, so they're in a better position to manage it. But make no mistake, it's a real cost. And again, it's a cost with no offsetting benefit. Far too many of these suits are inappropriate. There's no real kind of violation that's going on. It's just a way to get a shakedown. It's a harder shakedown from the lawyer's perspective with a bigger payoff.
I see. So everybody, now we understand what's really going on. Stick with us. We're going to write back with some resolutions and what Wayne and his group are proposing. So stick with us. We'll be right back with more Saving with Steve. Perfect. That's great, Wayne.
Hang on 1 second.
Okay. All righty. So.
Susan Diamond, give me a call when you get a chance.
Okay, she's still talking. Okay. All right. So, Wayne, whenever you're ready, we're going to go right back in.
Okay, give me 1 second. I apologize.
Okay.
Yep, I'm ready.
Okay, great. Here we go. Cameron, we're going to be moving into segment 2 with Wayne Winegarden. So here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, welcome back to the Saving with Steve show, where we talk about the ins and outs of money. Pretty much everything in the sun relates to you having a happy or healthy relationship with money. I want to thank you for joining us. Hey, you can go into our Steve at or Saving with Steve Sexton on our Facebook page, get guest gifts, background, behind the scenes stuff, recordings, the whole shot. So we're going to step right back in here with Wayne Winegarden. We've been talking about what the issue is with lawyers and the frivolous lawsuits and all the things going on with that. Now we're going to talk about what can be done, what their study shows, how it can help the economy and reduce inflation, the whole shot. So with that, I want to welcome Wayne Winegarden back. Wayne, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so now, so help us understand. I know you've done your study, and how could making changes to the law or tort law help grow the economy, reduce inflation, and actually boost tax revenue?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember when we're talking about these issues is that what grows the economy, right? The economy grows when we are either more productive, so that we can produce more things with the same amount of kind of resources. And if we have more people, then we can produce more as well. But that idea of being able to produce more per person is kind of that key essential to how, as a nation, we can continue to be more prosperous. And so the problem with the tort abuse problem is that it makes it more difficult for people to produce the same amount of output. So you're diminishing our productivity, and you're taking resources away from those who are kind of using those well, and we're spending them on kind of less value added stuff. So instead of a small business trying to come up with kind of the new technology, he's spending his resources defending against a lawyer. Same thing, a small business, instead of trying to serve their community, whether it's, restaurant, whatever the case may be, that has a lot of value. You're providing people with valuable services. They're not spending the time on that. That is what kind of diminishes his growth. And when you talk about that writ large, when you look at our growth now, which is slower than it used to be, we're growing now around 2%. We call that good growth. When I was younger, it was 3%.
Mhm.
And there's no reason we can't get back there, despite what some of the negative connotations what people would say. But we need to get these types of kind of productivity detracting policies removed. So that's kind of, when we look at litigators and the kind of the problem of tort abuse, there's a key thing, right? The key balance we need to make. People need to have access to the court system to get restitution when kind of legitimate, when they have legitimate cases, when harms have been put against them, when someone's acted irresponsibly. That access is essential. So we need to preserve that access, while at the same time raising the cost on kind of litigators who are kind of trying to abuse the system, and lowering the cost for businesses to defend themselves. Right now, when you look at kind of the way our system is set up, the balance is off, so that the reward from engaging in this activity is very, very high. The cost of engaging it is very, very low. And the cost of defending yourself against these actions are very, very high. When you kind of put all those incentives together, you end up with the problem that we have. And so, and many of these kind of solutions have been around there for a long time. But what we need to do, kind of in that broad sense, is change that balance. We need to make it cheaper or less risky for businesses to defend themselves. And we need to make it more costly or riskier for, excuse me, for the lawyers who are trying to abuse the system from engaging in the activity. So if you look at some of the specific things we talk about, one of the first things that we're particularly concerned is this idea of outsourcing the Attorney General's job. Certainly outsourcing it when you have a contingency fee arrangement, so that if you're an Attorney General, let's say that you're concerned about the opioid crisis, and you think there's a legitimate reason why you need to sue or litigate the issue, and you could say that you don't have the manpower, which is usually the excuse. You don't have the manpower. Well, outsourcing that kind of to a lawyer, that perhaps that makes sense, but putting them on a contingency fee arrangement does not. They obviously, the allure is that it costs you nothing if you're the AG, right? But the problem is you've set up this jackpot justice for the lawyers. So if you're the AG, if you need expanded help, that needs to be on a basic kind of pay per hour type of fee arrangement that's consistent with any other contractor, right? You don't have if you're going to outsource the construction of a road, right? The builder doesn't get payment based on how many people are using the road. There's not that type of reward structure built in. That kind of natural limit on how much a private litigator can get needs to be in there. You can't have the power of the Attorney General's office a means for jackpot justice for lawyers. So that was one of the first things we talked about, but that needs to be addressed. Broader speaking, we need to cap how much somebody, a lawyer can make. When you have these lawyers in these class actions making billions of dollars, they're no longer an officer of the court. They become an interested party in the transaction. And that's wrong. It sets up all the incentives. That needs to be either capped to some level in some way, and the use of contingency fees needs to be constrained so that we don't have basically lawyers becoming parties to a lawsuit. Like in the UK, for instance, right, they're officers of the court. There is no contingency fee because as an officer of the court, you get paid for your services, but you're an officer of the court. We need to bring that kind of capping for the private lawyers outside of when they're working for the AG's office. And then we need to actually help businesses in some way where there's a penalty for lawyers who are bringing clearly frivolous. And, that's a vague concept. We need to define it specifically. But when you have a clearly frivolous lawsuit, there needs to be a cost on the lawyer in terms of a fine, a penalty for bringing those types of cases, so that they have a higher cost or a higher risk when they're going out and they're trying to do these types of drive-by cases where, you just drive by the small business, view the parking lot, and try to see if you can shake down the business for some money. That's clearly frivolous. There needs to be some sort of penalty for the lawyers when you go to court and you have those types of circumstances. And you also need the businesses, when you're facing a frivolous case, to be able to have their costs compensated for, so that, when we talked about earlier, your client who forked over the $10,000 because they didn't want to spend 50 grand defending themselves. Well, perhaps if they felt like they had a strong case and they knew they can get that 50 grand or had a chance of getting that 50 grand reimbursed, that the economic judgment is going to change in terms of that calculation. Should I defend myself? Well, this is clearly, people can ask themselves that question. I think this is really clearly frivolous. Let's go and defend ourselves. And then when we win, we'll get our money back. So those types of kind of arrangements are going to change that balance, so that it costs businesses less, or they have less risk for defending themselves. There's more risk on the attorneys when they're bringing frivolous cases. And again, only the frivolous cases. When there's a legitimate claim, absolutely, they need to have the ability to bring those. But we need to reduce the incentive for bringing these frivolous claims and finally cap how much they get. Right? Attorneys getting $1 billion, from class action suits, and there's precedents for that. That is unacceptable, and that creates this incentive to have that tort tax. And that's what we looked at. When you look at how much it costs, the economic analyses have shown, you're talking about $44 billion a year. About 2% of our economy is wasted on this frivolous type of litigation. And if we remove that, we're not only getting the benefit of not having that $44 billion, but we're now also expanding the returns from engaging in entrepreneurship. And that added incentive to more entrepreneurship, that's going to accelerate growth beyond the 2% that we talked about. That's not something that I don't think is quantifiable, certainly not something we tried to quantify, but having that greater incentive for entrepreneurship, that's what we're missing. That's what we need to keep changing kind of our laws, our regulations to enhance entrepreneurship, to reward that. This is an important step in doing that, and that will pay off by increasing our productivity, increasing our ability to grow. And that's really the key to kind of addressing so many of the problems that we're facing in this country.
So now here's the big question, and just the last question before I go. We know there's a lot of lawyers in the political system, the whole shot. Is on a self-serving side on them, this would be hard legislation to get through if you're looking to reform the whole system. Do you see, is it taking, I'm going to say, is there legs to it? Is it taking hold?
I don't think there's legs to it. I mean, this is a little bit of shouting into the wind at this point. One of the reasons we wanted to do this is to remind people this problem's out there, to get conversation about it, to get people talking about it, to get small businesses, large businesses. The more that people talk about it, the more that we recognize this problem is there. I think that's the first step. But undoubtedly, there's a reason why this problem has festered for decades. And it's because exactly what you just said, that the lawyer interest group, right, as well as the politicians, that they all look at the positive side for litigation. And undoubtedly, there is a positive side, right? There is a need for the court system, especially when, to punish bad actors and to reward people for the damages that they've suffered. But what they'll do is they take that valuable part, and then they kind of emphasize that while ignoring all of these costs. And what we're really hoping to say is, look, obviously we need that. Nobody's saying that needs to be taken away, but we need to focus on these costs, because that's hurting way more people year in, year out compared to kind of what's going on here. And just the more we have this conversation, the more we talk about it, hopefully that will over time build up the movement. But no, I wouldn't expect that there's any type of really good legislation happening in the next couple of years, unfortunately.
Well, folks, you just heard Wayne Winegarden. I think it'd be wonderful we start spreading the word and you start talking about it, because if you really think about what's going on here, it could save you money. It could save the business money. It could prevent a friend of yours from going out of business because of this stuff. And you know what? It makes sense. If you want to read more about this, go to, it's called pacificresearch.org. You can look for the report there. It's right there. You'll see Dr. Wayne Weingardner and Kerry Jackson, the co-authors of this. It'd be a worthwhile read. Share it with, talk to your politician, see if we can get some legs on this issue, because I think it'd be a great thing not to have to worry about getting sued over something you didn't know about or didn't think to know about, not just because you were, somebody says there's no excuse for not knowing. I mean, it's not a traffic ticket. You weren't speeding. It's something that's the difference between 3 or 4 inches sometimes on a stall or a parking spot that somebody's suing somebody for that could destroy business. So Wayne, I want to thank you for joining us today. Again, I have this right. It's the pacificresearch.org where people can go to. And you know what? I would love for your organization to keep in contact with ours, because if something does occur with this or you need some extra help, we'd love to help you, because you know what? There's a lot of people have been hurt from frivolous lawsuits. I hope to not have that happen too much in the future. And with that, I want to thank you for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful week, Wayne. And you know what? Maybe we can have you back next time. Okay.
I would love it. Thanks so much.
All right. We'll see you. Thank you.
See you. Bye-bye.
Everybody, I want to thank you all for joining us here on Saving with Steve. We will look forward to seeing you next week with some more Saving with Steve. And until then, you have a safe and happy, wonderful week. Bye-bye.